Why hello there! Would you like to learn to make simple yet exciting animations just like this one? Well, if so, then you're in luck, because I'm here to show you how you can easily make animations with AnimeEffects, because that's kind of the general idea behind a tutorial. Alright, so here we are in AnimeEffects, and before I get into it, I would just like to talk a little bit about what AnimeEffects is and what it is not. Basically, it is a program for more or less making animated images. It is not for making any kind of longer animations. As far as I know, it doesn't even have any type of sound support. It also does not have any tools for creating graphics, only for manipulating them. So it is far from the best animation software out there, but it is definitely one of the most convenient animation programs. So let's get into this and make a new project. So File and New Project. And we can choose an initial resource. And we're going to choose this PSD file. And max frames, that is the length of your animation in frames at 60 frames per second. So however long you want the animation to be in seconds times 60. We actually only want this to be 1 second, so 60 frames. Then if we wanted to, we could specify the canvas size, but we are not going to because it is going to take the canvas size from the file that we imported. Alright, and here we have a graphic of the Nurse Yoma from my review of the Sailor Moon role-playing game, because I had these graphics laying around and they happen to have been designed with the ability to be posed, so it works for this purpose. So first, let's take a look at what we've got around here. Essentially, we have our main view area here, and then we have our tool dock, our target dock, which also has our timeline in it, and the property dock. So first, let's look at the target dock, where we see our resource file, and if we open it up, we get all of our folders and layers, which are all imported from the PSD file. And that's a big part of what I was saying, that it's one of the most convenient programs, because you can lay everything out in Photoshop, then you can bring it in here, and you keep all of your layers and everything exactly as they were. Now, one thing that I feel is probably important to discuss right from the beginning here is the concept of depth. Essentially, every folder and every object have a depth, a position that they exist in the stack of objects in the scene. So if we look here, the main folder has a depth of 0, the folder for the head has a depth of -1, the torso image has a depth of -11, and the important thing here is that that specified depth does not have to correspond to the location of the object within the folders and layers. So just for example here, we may notice that the hair is in front of the torso. So we open up the head folder and go to the hair and see that it has a depth of -5. And the torso, as we saw, has a depth of -11. So we'll just go up here and set this to -11.5. And now it is behind that, but is still in here in the folder with the head, which is a thing that will be convenient for later. Alright, now let's look at the view settings. So our first option here is Show Polygon Wireframes. Just select an object and hit that. That is going to show the polygons of the wireframe mesh that it attaches to every object automatically that it imports. A thing that is very convenient that it does for you. Then we have Cut Image by the Frame, which will hide everything outside the frame. So that's basically the image that we had in our PSD file, but we still have the data that's outside it. It's just hidden. Then we can rotate the images clockwise, counterclockwise, and reset. Not really sure why you would need that, but if you do, it's there. It's a thing you can do. Alright, so next on to the toolbox, we have the camera cursor, which is what we've been using. It moves the camera around. Then we have the Scale, Rotate, and Translate tool. And now that we're actually on the tools, I should probably discuss what exactly this program does. And what it does is Keyframe Animation, which is basically you input various keyframes and then it just interprets all of the movements between those 2 points. So let's just get started here and zoom into our timeline. And we're basically just going to be doing an idle animation here. So the first thing we want to do is create a keyframe for the whole character here. So we select the folder that's got everything in it, and we hit the move keyframe. It is important to remember to set your keyframes at the beginning of things before you go about moving them, because if you don't, it won't have a keyframe of your starting position. So now let's go to halfway in here, and we want to move the whole thing just a little bit, but we are going to look at the move actions a little bit first. First thing we can do is move, fairly normal. We can also scale and rotate. We have 2 options here, the transform and the transform centroid, and that lets us move our center point so that when we do the other stuff, like scale and rotate, it does it from that point. Also, we have 3 little checkboxes here for necessarily move, necessarily rotate, and necessarily scale. And let's just click all of those on. And if we do that, when we create a keyframe by doing one of those things, it will create a keyframe for all of those things. But we do not need that. We only want to do a move. So we are going to move the character just slightly down. Like that. And of course that looks weird, so we want this to loop. And to do that, we go to Project. And while we're here, this is where you can adjust your canvas size and your max frames, and also set it to loop. So we click loop, and now it loops. Basically, it's going from keyframe 1 to keyframe 2, and then it's interpreting the section from keyframe 2 to the end as if keyframe 1 was at the end. Now we're going to get to the fun part, the bone creation tool. So we click on here, and we have options for add bones, move joints, bind objects, adjust influence, paint influence, and erase influence. So basically, bones are the things that you attach to the image that you can then move. And you can attach them to an object directly, or attach them to a folder, which allows you to move all of the objects within the folder. And so basically, to manipulate this like we want to, just kind of like a jointed paper doll, what we want to do is go to the main folder, where we already are, and we want to create our bones there. So let's start using the Add Bone tool. We're going to create one right around the area of the hips, then up to the chest, into the shoulder. Then we're going to put 2 in the arm because we want to be able to move this arm independently of the sleeve. Down here and all the way out here. Then we go back and click here, which will allow us to attach another bone there. And this arm here is not jointed. It is a single piece. So we are going to have to move that differently, but for right now, it only needs 1 bone in it. Then we go back here for bone in the neck and 1 in the head. And then, of course, if we wanted to, we could remove the bones with the Remove Bone tool, and we could move them with the Move Joint tool, which we will be doing a lot of fairly shortly. So now the Bind Objects. This basically allows you to bind objects within the folder to the bones, so that when you move the bone, it will move that object. So we select a bone, and then select the object we want to link it to. Bone, object, and when you do this, it creates a little dotted white line. I wish the line was a little more pronounced because it is kind of hard to see sometimes. Now here we have a bunch of bones and a bunch of objects we need to attach them to. So we need to open the right arm folder, and then we can attach all the pieces. Now here with the head, we don't need to open up. We want everything in the head folder to be attached to this one bone, so we just attach the bone to the folder. Now we can pull up the bone posing tool, and we can move our bones, which move all the stuff with them. And when we move the main bone, it also moves every bone that comes off of that one. So let's test all of our joints and see how they look. See that? That looks bad. That looks okay. It's a very trial and error thing. We need to just go in with the move joint tool, move the joints to where we think they should be, and then try it again. Alright, so all those joints look good, and so let's talk more about the bone posing tool. So essentially you have move bones, which, as you've seen me doing, is the tool that lets you move all the bones, and of course when you move a bone, every bone that comes off of it is going to move along with it. Then there's also the pull bones tool, and when you use the pull bones tool, it moves all the bones that are connected. It also has a weight here, so the higher that is, the less it's going to pull all the other bones. Yes, it is something that's very easy to make a mess with, but used sparingly, it works out pretty good. Yeah, it can. Using it requires a little bit of finesse. And then also the erase poses tool, which is really convenient in this particular situation because we want to get rid of all of these weird poses that we did just now. Of course, also, if we wanted to get rid of the poses, we could just go down here to the Pose Keyframe that it created when we moved them and just delete it. So there we go. So now that we've got all of our bones in, we need to actually animate this thing. So we will make a Pose Keyframe, which is just going to save this starting pose, then go to our next point here, and change it how we want it to be. So I'm just gonna move the torso down a little. I'm going to, actually, I want to go back here. I want the standard pose to have this arm a bit higher, and have that backfire like that, and like that, like that, and that's something like that. Alright. Also, whenever you go to the bone tool, it goes back to your standard posing. So now we can go back here and bring things however we want them. I happen to want them like this. Then if we hit play, we will see our animation. Look at it. It's animated. And at this point, it's probably worth mentioning easing, which you will see here for move, easing, pose, easing. Essentially, this affects how things get from point A to point B. So normally, a thing will just go from point A to point B at a consistent speed, like this. But that looks kind of awkward, so what we want it to do is not do that. We want to use easing, which will make it so that it starts slower, picks up speed, and then slows again as it reaches point B. So we want to change the easing from linear to sine, and linear to sine, and then go to our next point. Change from linear to sine, linear to sine. I will admit I don't actually know the technical effects of all these different easing types, but here's an informative graphic showing how they all work in practice. Alright, so now we have this, and it looks much more natural. However, we still do have an issue with that arm, so let's get to that. We'll select the left arm, and we're going to want to hide the right arm because it's kind of in the way. So go back to our bone tool, and we are going to add bones to the right arm. But unlike previously, we're now adding them directly onto the object instead of onto the folder containing the object, which allows us to do it differently and use the Adjust Influence tool, which we use to expand the influence of the bones, because basically what's going to happen is the bones are going to allow us to deform the object via that mesh that was put on top of it. Getting the influence right is kind of a trial and error thing. It's just one of those things that you gotta try it and see how it looks. So, that actually looks pretty good for my first try. That didn't as much. You can also adjust the influence with the Paint and Erase influence tools, but I don't find them as convenient to use as just the regular way of doing it. Alright, that looks good enough for a tutorial. And this is our starting keyframe. We are going to start it up like this. Then go down to our next position, and we don't have to make any keyframes because it's going to make it automatically when we adjust the things as such. So now, in addition to its original movement, it also does this flexing movement. And also we're going to want to make sure that we have our easing set to whatever we want it to be set to, so that it looks more natural. Alright, and now we can put the right arm back on and move down to the legs. So we're going to select the leg we're working on, start with the left leg, and we are going to use the bone tool to add bones. We want to start right around where the hip joint should be, and then around where the knee is, and then down to here. And we're going to adjust our influence, which my biggest piece of advice on getting the influence right is it's generally bigger than you think it needs to be. So like this is fairly close. Let's just look at how that does. It does not very well. Unless that's what you want to happen. If you want that to happen, then that's exactly what you want. But if you don't, you need to make sure your influence is large enough to like go outside the entirety of whatever object you are trying to manipulate. Turning the mesh on may help with that, but it seems like it goes outside of that too. Alright, that looks good enough for what we're doing here. Then we go and do the same thing on the right leg. Alright, that actually went pretty well. So now we're going to want to move the legs. So we're going to make ourselves a pose keyframe for both of them. Then go to our center point here and move them. Alright, now we've got the legs working. Of course, we do have a slight issue here with this whole situation. So we need to fix that. And we are once again going to use the deforming bone tool, but we're going to do things a little bit different first. So once again, let's get this arm out of the way and select the torso and select the mesh creating tool. So this is going to allow us to create our own mesh instead of using the mesh that it automatically applies. So let's make a mesh here. So now we go back to the bone tool, and if we hit the show polygon wireframe, it is going to show the wireframe that we created. And yes, I realize this wireframe is terrible, but I'm doing it quickly. Oh, it's so terrible that it doesn't cover part of the image. Alright. Now our whole image should be good. Alright, so we are going to add a bone. Right around here, and then right down to there. And we are going to adjust its influence. Don't have to be very precise here because it's just going to move this. Then put our starting pose. Go to our halfway point and move it like that. And it's deforming it based on our mesh instead of the default mesh, which makes it move differently. More like we want it to. And now it moves like that. And as long as we're here, there's also the Freeform to Form tool, which is actually the manipulate mesh tool. It's not only freeform. So let's turn our mesh back on, and we're going to once again want to create a base keyframe, and then go to our second frame, and we are going to use the drag vertex tool, and we're going to drag this vertex, which is going to bring this sleeve in. Let's see how that looks. That does not look very good. Alright, so after many setbacks, that's good enough. Alright, so let's turn everything back on, not view the mesh, not view the bones, and look at our animation here, which looks pretty good. It could use a little bit of finessing, so let's do a little bit of finessing. So first let's look at the hair, which is conveniently in the folder with the head and moves with the head because we were able to attach it and change its depth. I was talking about that earlier. So yeah, now we're going to use the Freeform Deformation tool. And let's make that a bit bigger. And we want to go and make an FFD, or Freeform Deform keyframe, to start, and then want to move the hair however we want to move the hair. Let's try moving it up like this. That does not look incredibly good. Alright, that looks okay. Now let's do the same with the front hair. So let's just take the whole front part of the hair and move it up with this tool. But we did that. We don't want to do that. So take the erase tool, and we can erase the part that we didn't really want to mess with. And this is all good if we want a 1-second animation. If we were exporting this as a GIF, it would be perfectly good. But what if we don't? What if we want to export it as a short video file? But not this short. We would want to make it longer. So we go up to Project, Max Frames, and then set it to longer. Let's just make this 4 seconds. So 240 frames. And now it is 240 frames. And because we only have those two keyframes, it moves between the first to second and then back from the second to first, but does the second over a much longer span of time. So we don't want that to be the case. We want to move back and forth between the two keyframes 4 times. So what we are going to do here is select and copy all of the keyframes. When the folder is closed, you can still select everything that is in the folder. Then we're going to go to our 1 second mark, and we are going to paste our keyframes, except that there is an issue that we don't want certain keyframes in there. I'll just show you how it goes like right now. See, that is not what we wanted to happen. So basically we want to remove any bone or mesh keyframes from the 1 second mark. Unfortunately, removing the bone and mesh keyframes removes the associated pose and FFD frames, so we need to manually come in and copy them and paste them over here. And now, aside from that issue, it works. So now we can select our second group of keyframes, copy them, and paste them. Then we can select both groups of keyframes, copy them, and paste them where we want them. And now we have our animation running 4 times. And this seems like a good opportunity to talk about some of the other keyframes that are available. So in addition to the move, rotate, scale, and FFD that we've already covered, there is also a depth and opacity keyframe, which you can use to adjust the depth or opacity of the object. And I discussed how depth works earlier, so you can use that if, say, we wanted to bring this up and it went in front of her head, but because it's behind her head, we would need to move it forward. And opacity is just the opacity. But image, that is one that we should talk about. So let's say we want this character to blink right around here. Let's go here to head, our standard head image, and let's make an image keyframe. And we're going to select head blink. So now when we get to this keyframe, it changes the graphic from the head to the second image of the head that was blinking. And then, of course, she'll just keep her eyes closed until it starts over again. So we need to then put another image keyframe, open this up, and select the head, the standard one. So now it will go like that, maybe a little bit lower. So now, whenever we get there, she blinks. And that is basically all the features in AnimeEffects. There's, of course, a little finesse involved in all of them and like little things that could be discussed further, but I didn't. This is just a general overview. But now let's export our project. We can export as a JPEG or PNG sequence, as a GIF, or as various formats of video. Let's just export as an MP4. And we want to select a codec and various other options. And then we have our image width and image height. We want to make it smaller. Basically, anytime you're working with raster graphics and they are being rotated, like in here, you should always make sure that your work image is larger than your final output. So I'm making it 800 pixels, and we have our start frame, end frame, frames per second. Well, the rest of this video is 30 frames per second, so we're just going to make this 30 frames per second, and yeah, let's export. Alright, thanks for watching. If this video has been helpful for you, then make sure to hit all of the lovely buttons, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I mainly made this video due to a lack of English language resources for this program, so if people have a lot of questions, maybe I'll make another one. Well, until next time.